Have you ever wondered what the entire journey of Abraham looked like on a map? How does his life, full of promises, tests, and divine encounters, unfold across the ancient world? In this video, we'll not only answer that question, but we'll also trace Abraham's footsteps from his homeland to the lands of promise, showing you how his journey was far more than just a physical one. It was a journey of faith that would change the course of history forever.
So I'm up here on the site called locally Mamre, and this is the site that the archaeologists associated with Gomorrah. So here you can see that ashy layer that's just underneath the surface. This is full of burned pottery. It's full of the fragments of human bones. The question is what evidence is there of this burning sulfur that rained down? Well, it seems that the culprit are these sulfur balls that are also found in this area.
Abraham, one of the central figures in biblical history, was born around 4,000 years ago in the ancient city of Ur, located in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, which is considered one of the oldest cities ever recorded. At the time of Abraham's birth, only a few hundred years had passed since the Great Flood, and Abraham's great-great-grandfather Noah was approaching the end of his long life. What many people don't realize about Abraham is that even though Noah had likely shared his knowledge of God with him, Abraham and his family were initially worshippers of Mesopotamian idols. But everything would change one day when a shocking event occurred. The God of Noah spoke directly to Abraham with an incredibly unusual command. God told him, "Get out of your homeland," and with that, God made an extraordinary promise. Not only would he lead Abraham to new lands, but he would make a great nation out of him, and most astonishingly, through him, the entire world would be blessed. At this point in the story, you might wonder what such a strange promise meant. But before we dive into that, let's examine what Abraham did next. By faith, Abraham packed up his family and set out without hesitation. It's likely that he took a commonly known trade route, stopping along the way to rest and resupply until he reached the city of Haran, a location that may have been named after his brother. Abraham's father, Terah, originally named him Abram at birth, but this name would soon change as a significant part of Abraham's journey unfolded. Abraham and his family settled in Haran for several years, remaining there until his father passed away. It wasn't until Abraham was 75 years old that he, along with his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot, left Haran. Their journey would eventually lead them to a place so wicked that God himself would intervene in a dramatic and powerful way, but not before they first stopped in a strange land called Shechem. Shechem, located within the territory of Canaan, was home to the Canaanite people. Archaeological evidence reveals altars built by the Canaanites, who practiced rituals so depraved that they were willing to sacrifice their own children to appease their gods. Abraham's family, on the other hand, was probably grateful that God had never asked them to participate in such horrific acts. God's opposition to child sacrifice was clear, and his future commands would reflect his desire for righteousness. Later, when Abraham and his family traveled to Bethel, they were faced with a severe famine which forced them to leave and journey to Egypt. This part of the story is perhaps one of the more unusual episodes in Abraham's life. Fearing for his life because of his wife's great beauty, Abraham, in a moment of insecurity, instructed Sarai to tell the Egyptians that she was his sister. He feared that if the Egyptians knew she was his wife, they might kill him to take her. Although this may seem like a strange decision, his logic wasn't entirely unfounded. When the Pharaoh of Egypt learned of Sarai's beauty, he immediately desired her. But before he could act on his intentions, God sent plagues to warn Pharaoh that Sarai was already married. As a result, Pharaoh sent Abraham and his family away, sparing them from harm. Once they returned to Canaan, Abraham faced a new challenge. Both his and Lot's herds had grown so large that the land could no longer support both families. To resolve the issue, Abraham gave Lot the option to choose any land he desired. Lot, seeing the fertile plains of Jordan, including the wealthy cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, chose that region for himself. Abraham, in contrast, settled in a place called Mamre, where he built an altar to God. Remarkably, the altar Abraham built remains today, a testament to the enduring legacy of his faith.
So this is the altar site, the site of Abraham's altar. Now, how did modern know that this is where Abraham had built his altar? Well, everything that comes after this archaeologically is built around this particular place. This is the center of the archaeological site of Mamre. Obviously, this altar would have been destroyed and rebuilt and repaired many, many times over the course of the last some 4,000 years. But we know from the site itself that this is the sacred place within the sacred site of Mamre. So this is what's left from the altar of Abraham, and this is a sacred place within the sacred place, which the whole site is built around.
Despite Lot's decision to settle in a more prosperous area, things were not going well for him. 4 kings from the east invaded Canaan and captured Lot, taking him and his belongings as prisoners. Abraham, outraged by the kidnapping of his nephew, mobilized his servants, turning them into soldiers. With remarkable courage, Abraham pursued the kings, rescuing Lot and recovering much of what had been taken. This victory solidified Abraham's reputation as a leader, and he returned home to Mamre, where he was hailed as a hero by the Canaanite kings. However, in the midst of this praise, a mysterious figure emerged, the king of Salem, later known as Jerusalem, named Melchizedek. Melchizedek was unlike any other king in the region. He was a priest of the one true God. Abraham, recognizing Melchizedek's unique role, gave him 1/10 of everything he owned as a sign of respect and gratitude. The story of Melchizedek is fascinating because he is seen as a precursor to Yeshua the Messiah in biblical theology. The book of Hebrews points out that Melchizedek's priesthood foreshadowed the eternal priesthood of Christ. Some scholars even believe that Melchizedek was a pre-incarnate appearance of Yeshua, and the interaction between Melchizedek and Abraham highlights the deep spiritual truths that would unfold in the centuries to come. After the victory, Abraham returned home to Mamre, but his thoughts were consumed by a concern that had been on his mind for years. God interrupted his contemplation and assured him, "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, and your reward will be very great." But Abraham had one pressing question: who will inherit my reward when I die? My wife Sarai is still barren, and we have no children. God responded with a breathtaking promise. Abraham's descendants would be more numerous than the stars in the sky. To further emphasize his commitment to this promise, God instructed Abraham to prepare a covenant ritual involving the sacrifice of several animals, and God himself passed between the pieces of the animals as a sign that he was making this covenant in his own name. But there was more to come. Despite God's promises, Sarai, unable to conceive, suggested an unconventional solution. Abram should father a child with her maidservant, Hagar. Abram reluctantly agreed, and Hagar bore him a son named Ishmael. However, this wasn't part of God's plan. God confirmed that Sarai, despite her old age, would indeed bear a son, and that son would be the one through whom God's promises would be fulfilled. It was at this moment that Abram's name was changed to Abraham, meaning father of many nations, and Sarai's name was changed to Sarah, meaning princess. These changes reflected the new identity that God was giving them as part of his divine plan. Before Isaac, the promised son, was born, one of the most extraordinary events in Abraham's life took place. 3 men visited Abraham at his camp in Mamre. One of them was God himself, while the other 2 were angels. Although they appeared as men, Abraham recognized them for who they truly were and welcomed them with great hospitality, offering them the best food he had. During this visit, God reaffirmed his promise that Sarah would bear a son. However, as the men left, they made their way toward the wicked cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham, knowing that his nephew Lot lived in Sodom, couldn't help but worry. God revealed to Abraham that he was about to destroy these cities due to their extreme sinfulness. Abraham, ever the intercessor, pleaded with God to spare the cities if even 10 righteous people could be found there. God agreed, but unfortunately even 10 righteous people could not be found, and the cities were destroyed. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is one of the most devastating and sobering events in the Bible. As Lot and his family fled the city, God warned them not to look back. But Lot's wife, unable to resist, turned around and was transformed into a pillar of salt. The judgment of God upon Sodom and Gomorrah serves as a stark reminder of the consequences of sin and the holiness of God. Remarkably, archaeologist Joel Kramer has identified the location of these ancient cities, and evidence of the destruction remains to this day, including preserved balls of sulfur, which may have been the source of the fire and brimstone that rained down on the cities.
So I'm standing now at the largest of these early bronze sites on the southeast side of the Dead Sea. This one locally is known as Babedra, and is the site that is associated with Sodom in the Bible. It was discovered as an early bronze site back in 1924. It was excavated in the 1960s and 1970s. And what archaeologists found here was this burn destruction that goes across this site. This city came to an end through a fire destruction. So here you can see this ashy burn destruction layer just underneath the surface. It's full of human bone fragments, burned pottery, and it's covering the entire site. So off in the distance here, you can see Babedra, identified as Sodom. And then right here to the southwest is this massive cemetery that you can see with all these pits that mark its boundaries. And these are formed because of the locals for decades have been coming and digging into these graves looking for antiquities to sell in the antiquity market. And so it's estimated from the archaeologists that dug here back in the 60s and the 70s that there are around 500,000 people buried in this cemetery. And it's just staggering. And what's really intriguing then is that they found a burn destruction across the cemetery that happened at the same time that the city was destroyed. So the city and the cemetery were destroyed in the same fire disaster. And there's no reason why an army would attack a bunch of graves and burn a cemetery. And so this was one of the major reasons that they interpreted the destruction here as being caused by a natural disaster.
After these events, Abraham's faith would be tested more than ever before. God instructed him to take his beloved son Isaac, the long-awaited child of promise, and offer him as a burnt offering on Mount Moriah near the city of Salem. This command must have been agonizing for Abraham, as he had waited so long for Isaac, the son through whom God's promises would be fulfilled. Yet despite his feelings, Abraham obeyed, believing that even if Isaac were to die, God could raise him from the dead. As he prepared to sacrifice Isaac, God intervened, sending an angel to stop him. Instead of Isaac, a ram was provided as the sacrifice, and Abraham's faith was rewarded. This event took place on the same mountain where, centuries later, God himself, in the form of Yeshua Messiah, would lay down his life for the sins of the world. The story of Abraham's willingness to sacrifice Isaac serves as a powerful foreshadowing of God's ultimate sacrifice through Christ. Abraham's faith continues to be an example for us today, showing us the importance of trusting God even in the most difficult and confusing circumstances. Abraham passed away and was buried next to his wife Sarah in Hebron. However, his legacy of faith continues to inspire believers around the world. His story is a testament to God's faithfulness and the power of trust in his promises. Just as God called Abraham to follow him, he is calling each of us to follow him on the greatest journey of all. The truth of Abraham's story would ultimately point to the greatest promise of all, the arrival of Yeshua, through whom the entire world would be blessed. You can see the entire story of Yeshua on a map in this video.